We're back again with the Coleman KT196 go-kart. Last time we worked on this thing, we revived the carburetor and engine and put some new brake hardware on here so we could rip around in this thing. And ever since then, this thing's been getting ripped around quite a bit. But as anybody would know with these 196cc or a Honda or a Predator 212, which are all the same engine essentially, the carburetors can be finicky sometimes. And even with a bunch of work and jet changes and all that, you could sometimes never get the things to operate on wide open choke. But because of that, a lot of people upgrade these things, and even if you don't have any issues with the carburetor, sometimes you just want a little more juice out of this little engine, so you upgrade. That's what we're going to do here because, well, as usual, Amazon provides, and we're going to upgrade this thing. We have the Mikuni style carburetor right here. I think this is a 28 millimeter port. We have air cleaner, adapters, fuel hoses and gaskets and stuff, and we also have an exhaust pipe we're gonna change up to with the exhaust wrap. If this thing were to be used on a mini bike or ATV, it also came with handlebars for a throttle setup and everything, but we're obviously not going to be using that. And later on, I'll probably be opening that engine up to remove the governor hardware, which means I'll be needing some new gaskets, so those are in there as well. But our main thing is the carburetor, exhaust, and the associated hardware. So first thing I got to do is, well, pull the carburetor, exhaust, and associated hardware. So stand by. One of the other things that'll have to come out are these super long studs that hold the entire carb and air cleaner assembly on here. More than likely this little spacer is also going to have to go too. So let me get that off. Okay, we have our adapter bolted in place with the Allen screws that came with the kit. So it's all hooked up there. On our throttle cable, because the stock throttle cable does not have the little nipple or tip or whatever you want to call it on the end of it, compared to the throttle cable that came with this stuff, I'm gonna have to order another throttle cable that has that same tip like that. That cable's too short. It was geared for an ATV or mini bike, but that's okay. Once we get that cable, we'll be able to hook it up to our little throttle tube thingy that goes in the carburetor. But in the meantime, I could go ahead and bolt this thing up to at least have it staged, so when the cable comes in, I could hook all that up. And then I can also work on our exhaust stuff as well. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, we have our new throttle cable. It has the little tip on there necessary to allow us to hook up to our throttle tube in the new carburetor. I'm gonna have to pull off a little trough right here, or tunnel right here, in order to remove the old cable and route our new cable all the way to the back and underneath the seat over to the carburetor. 6 8mm bolts, 2 of them right here that could be easily reached with a ratchet, 2 more underneath that have to be reached with a wrench, unless you feel like going through the hassle of removing the seat just for those 2 bolts. I think I'll have them out before I can remove the seat by using a wrench, so let me go ahead and get that done. There's a couple of retaining nuts that hold the old cable in place on this bracket right here. Need to remove one of them so you could be able to route the cable around to be able to fish it out. Might need 2 hands for this. But it's got a simple lug. There we go. Got it. Now I could actually pull the cable all the way out and do everything in reverse with our new cable. Okay, we have our cable routed underneath the seat, the tunnel bolted back in place. I have the cable coming up through one of the old mounting holes on the block from the fuel tank to kind of act as a guide, so we have a nice arc on the cable. The other thing is we could put on our hardware for the carburetor. You have the cap here, there's a boot that has to go on. I took a moment to zip tie the boot in both places to kind of help hold the thing securely. Then we got our spring we got to put on, and lastly, try to do this, kind of a pain in the ass, but yeah, our throttle tube here, need to route this thing where, yeah, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, but there we go. Got the lug locked in place, so everything is secured on that end. Try not to booger up this washer here, or gasket I mean. Carefully put this thing back into the carburetor. Try to lock it down and make sure the washer is nice and secured. Hold our boot so I can lock everything down. Everything is secured. Now we're ready to rock and roll on that end. Took a moment to zip tie this fuel hose right here so it's not just flopping all over, but we have to find a neater way to do that, and also have to secure our fuel tank right here. So this thing been sitting like this for a day, so fuel is already gravity fed down into the carburetor here. Yeah, we're definitely gonna have to address that, but go ahead and see if this thing's gonna start up, since the bowl should definitely be full. Let's see. Even that exhaust sounds pretty cool for all intents and purposes. I was able to get that thing started without the choke, but we are going to have to hook up a choke because, well, quick starts without a choke aren't always going to happen. Choke lever's right here, and it's kind of spring loaded, so it's going to open up without any kind of cable tension. That means running another cable from here and down to the cab area, where I'll have to either drill a hole in the small dashboard where I could put a little cable sort of like on a car, or secure it with a bracket on the side. I'll figure that out in a second. Okay, we have a choke cable installed more or less in a temporary manner, because the choke cable being used is more geared for use in a car versus this type of application. The bracket right here, I had to actually take a small piece of fuel hose and put it around the tube in order to secure it in the clamp right there, and then bend the wire at a 90-degree angle to hook into the lever right there, which uses one of those ball tips, sort of like on the throttle cable. Then I routed it around along the same arc with the throttle cable, zip tying it, and then just bringing it around to here and zip tying it in place where it could be pulled up easily and held up. This is almost going to have to be a two-man kind of thing, because the spring-loaded lever springs back rather easily. But yeah, I'll have to actually source a choke cable for that carburetor in order to be able to utilize that thing single-handedly, something that actually locks in place. But in the meantime, we have it ready to go on that end. Also took a minute to use our wonderful zip ties to secure our fuel tank in the corner right here so it doesn't bounce all over the place. So I'm going to do something different with the fuel tank. I'm kind of visualizing something like a round keg style vessel that would serve as a tank, similar to how you might see an old dune buggy setup, but I'll have to find the right material to implement that idea. So with all that said and done, the system runs. Just have to see if this thing is going to actually jump up and go, or at least how much more it'll jump up and go compared to before. Stand by. Well, we had an unfortunate turn of events. The first thing is our carburetor might need a fuel pump because it seems like it does not like wide open throttle. It seems to be happy at about 2/3 to 3/4 throttle, where it'll kind of maintain a balance between a full float bowl and huffing gas. So we're going to have to look at that. The other more unfortunate problem is, well, the Batmobile broke its wheel and Joker got away. That sucks. We're going to have to replace a spindle. And because of that, I'm going to end up doing both sides because I don't want a repeat of this crap happening the next time we test drive it. So, yeah, this is going to be a good long standby. Okay, we have our new spindles in hand finally. Removal and replacement is pretty simple. You got a nut on the top, a nut on the bottom, and the ball joint, which is held in place with a nut. Now, this machine here, the top nut is a 12mm, bottom nut is a 13mm, and the ball joint on the tie rod end is a 12mm also. Also on there, there's a flat point that you could hold with a wrench to hold the ball joint stationary while you remove the nut on there. Mosquitoes are getting me here, that's why the camera's all over. But yeah, simple thing, just pop the nuts off, and then to get this thing off, probably have to use a screwdriver or something to just raise the upper control arm and get that garbage out, and have your new hardware that you just throw in its place and snug it all down. The nuts on both the top and bottom on these new ones are 1/2 inch. I believe they are. No, these are actually bigger. These look like they're probably 9/16. I'll confirm that in a quick second. Yep, 9/16. So your aftermarket hardware may vary in the size. But with that, go ahead and put that in. But here's a problem though. Because these are wider studs, these are going to have to get reamed out a little bit. Ain't that wonderful? Always something. Well, let me get my drill, ream these holes out a little bit, and then we could go ahead and put all this garbage together.
get the other side done just as well. So as usual, stand by. Removing your tire from your spindle, or in our case a broken spindle, is a simple matter of pulling out a retaining pin, removing the castle nut. In this case, our castle nut is 11/16 in size. So pop that out, get your washers out, and then just remove the tire off of the spindle. Because ours was broken, I had to hold the end of the shaft on the inside so I could be able to turn the nut off. But otherwise, just pull the tire off the thing and you're free and clear. And we could go ahead and put this thing back on. So I'm going to do that. Okay, we have both of our spindles in place. Tires are on, all hardware is on. Ready to rock and roll on that. We even took a moment to put a new steering wheel on here. One thing to notice on the steering wheel is this cap right here with this arrow pointing straight up because, well, with the new hardware, I had to do a front end alignment. Just like on a car, same thing. Put your steering wheel straight, and then on your tie rods here, hold your tie rod in stationary with a pair of pliers, wrench, whatever, and unscrew this nut right here, and then you'll be able to turn your tie rod either way to either toe out or toe in each wheel in reference to that steering wheel being dead center. So we have both wheels straight, so our alignment is pretty good as far as eyeballs are concerned. Unless you feel like making a tool to try to get a precise alignment, it's not really necessary because this thing ain't going that fast to warrant a precise alignment. But that's all done. So now, with this detour out of the way, we can get back to our engine and try to get things straightened out on that so we can actually get this thing back on the gravel road. Before we go the route of actually trying to put pulse pumps and other hardware on here, I decided to pull this carburetor apart to take a look at it to see if there might be something I could find that explains why the thing wanted to bog down and stutter at wide open throttle. I removed the float bowl, which is just 3 small screws that you can easily remove with a screwdriver. There was actually dirt in here. I cleaned the dirt out. Even though we have a fuel filter, dirt still somehow got in here, so I cleaned that out. I also removed the emulsion tube, which the jet is screwed into, so you would have to either take the jet out first, or in my case, this is a 7mm hex head, so I could have probably gotten a 7mm hex head even around the jet. But this jet here is marked 95. I think it's a rather large jet compared to the jets used in our old carburetor. 95 is like the biggest one for the old carburetor. I'm not sure about this particular carburetor, but I cleaned out the emulsion tube with some degreaser and blew it out to make sure there wasn't any trash in there. One of the little holes in here did have a little speck of some crap in there, so I poked that out with a needle. So I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this thing, and we're going to see how this thing acts after doing our cleanup job. So give me a second. Let's see what happens on the road. Okay, well, as we could see, this carburetor actually did a pretty decent job of making this thing jump up and go. There were a couple of hiccups here and there when we tried to go wide open throttle pretty quick, but that'll be a tuning issue and might need to up the jet inside the thing, the main jet that is, and just kind of play around with the thing. But for all intents and purposes, it jumped up pretty quick to the point that it would sometimes rev pretty high from what I would hear. So that might mean we have some valve float going on, which will mean later on adding a rev kit to this thing internally so we can allow this thing to safely rev up and be able to deliver the power that it needs to. But as the video showed, this thing will jump up and run and kind of rip pretty good. I'd want to do a time trial to see just how fast this thing is going, because the last time we clocked it, it did about 17 miles an hour. So I would imagine it's going a little bit faster. So stay tuned for all that. On the next go around, I'm probably going to be adding electric start to this thing so we could actually be able to crank this thing over while sitting in the cab instead of getting up and pulling a cord. And at the same time, I'll put an advanced timing key on the thing too so we can try to see what kind of gains we get on that as well. So stay tuned for all that. And for now, we're going to leave it off here. And always appreciate the likes and the subscriptions. And check out TikTok for any shorts that we might put on there regarding these projects. And stay tuned for more, because there is obviously going to be plenty more regarding this thing here. So we'll catch you later. I'm out.